Welcome everybody to the 2020 MATSOL Virtual Conference. Today is day 5 of the conference. I am Jason Fay, the Program and Member Engagement Coordinator at MATSOL, and your host for the conference.
Hi, I'm Helen Solorzano. I'm Executive Director of MATSOL. Every year, over 1,200 members gather for 4 days for our annual conference to share their expertise, experience, and insights as part of our mission to promote equity and excellence for English learners. This year, we can't be together in person, but are instead gathering here virtually to continue our professional learning together. So welcome to all of you. So on behalf of the MATSOL Board of Directors and the staff, we want to welcome you. We also want to take a moment to acknowledge the recent events around the murder of George Floyd and the protest against police brutality and systemic racism going on in Massachusetts and the nation right now, and say that we stand with members of our communities who are grieving, angry, and afraid, and call for change.
Now, webinar controls, there are 3 main buttons that you can use and audio settings. The chat will be enabled for this session, and it will be used to give you links. So please check the chat for links. Only raise your hand when you are asked to by the presenters or by the hosts. You can also lower your own hand. If you have a question, click on Q&A. If you see your question already asked, please click the thumbs up icon at the bottom left of the question. We are excited and grateful to have Aline and Johnny here to present on language practices for content teaching, co-teaching, and the collaboration tool. Aline, handing it over to you.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share the screen in a minute. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm Aline. I am an ESL teacher, Lawrence Public Schools, Upper School Academy. We teach mainly juniors and seniors.
And I'm Johnny Gelsomini. I'm a physics teacher at the high school in Lawrence, also the Upper School Academy.
So a little background about our district and our high school. At the high school, which is the size of Europe, very large, and we have, I want to say 3,500 students total, but Upper School Academy has around 1,400 students, and we have between 300 ELLs, and if you combine ELLs and former ELs, they're still getting monitored. We have around 700 in our school. We have a staff of 6 ESL teachers. And this year, we're grateful enough that we could collaborate with content area teachers by co-teaching. So we had a chance to co-teach, and that's what this presentation is about. It's about my co-teaching with Johnny in a physics class. Not
too much physics in the presentation.
Well, I'm going to leave it up to him, the physics part, since he's the expert. So, you know, we're very grateful that school administration were able to pair us together to work with low ELL students, mostly level 2s on that class, that we're having ESL classes on top of having a co-teaching model for physics with me and Johnny in the classroom. And lots of challenges, very large class. I think we started the year with almost 30 students, right, Johnny?
28, 29.
Yeah, and we're grateful that we had planning time together on top of co-teaching, which gave us the freedom and time to come up with this material to show everyone. Moving on. So, why isn't it? It started already. Okay, so here's our title, Language Practice for Content Teaching. We forgot that Jason was gonna do the intro, and we had a little bingo thing going on. It's just a social distance bingo. If you think you can identify yourself with any of those things, you can let us know in the chat later. I'm sure there's something you learned in difficult times. I'm still, like, you know, socially isolated. most of the time, and it's been tough. All right, so our focus for today is, I have to move this thing so I can read. I will be able to apply the DASI collaboration tool by creating a plan in order to better accommodate English language learners' needs in the classroom. That's our content objective. Language objective, I will orally discuss language practices in the classroom by using graphic organizers, modeling, and specific vocabulary words. So these are the goals for the day, and this is just a little modeling of what we do in the classroom every day, and every time we plan for a lesson, we had a content objective and a language objective, and it's just good practice. And how we write those objectives with those power verbs and Bloom's taxonomy, and you know, the language tools for the language objective. So feel free to use that in your classroom. So what is the DASI collaboration tool? Why is it useful for teachers? Jason, do you think I can you
I can send the link.
the raising, well, the link is going to be on the chat, but also I wanted to like raising hands. How many people actually know the collaboration tool or have used the collaboration tool before?
Yeah. Everyone, please raise your hand and keep your hand raised until we ask you to lower your hand.
I see 19, 22, 23.
I don't see anything. Where
Keep
is it?
going up.
Where's the raising hand thing?
Click on your participants.
Okay, 75 participants. Oh, okay, 32 hands.
Yeah, 32.
This is exciting. So, it's hard not to feel like a celebrity here. So I'm trying to be cool and humble. All right, so around half of our participants, the name, okay, 25, 22, okay, they're raising down. All right, I think it was 36. Was that what he said, Johnny, for most people?
The highest number I saw was 33, but it's about half of people. Some
so
people
about
they have it in the chat, but.
So hopefully half of you know about Fernanda Cray and the WIDA standards and the collaboration tool that was developed before. The collaboration tool has been going on since 2016. This link is on the chat. This is just a website. It's just a PDF format of what the collaboration tool is. The first time I looked at it, I think it was very overwhelming. Less is more. Guaranteed the first time I showed Johnny this and said, we're going to use this, or we're going to align this to your teaching so we can help those language learners. It can be a lot. We had some training at our central office for Lawrence Public Schools, and that helped a lot. I think that was like a aha moment for me. And, you know, this tool really, really spoke to me in terms of what to do to help those kids and how can we get the language out of it so they can actually do. The final goal is the content that had to be learned. And physics is a very demanding, awesome, but demanding content area. And language can be super rich, and it can be on the way of students actually understanding the content because the language is so elaborated. And I say that as a, you know, speaker of another language myself, and I see that a lot happening in science classes. So it's exciting to have a language teacher with a science teacher to use this collaboration tool.
If I could chime in real quick, Fernanda Cray just had a question, and actually really more of a comment about how macros are changing. And you mentioned that earlier. I don't know if you want to address that now.
Yes, I was going to address that later. Thank you, Fernanda. It's really hard to talk and look at myself in this document and still look at the chat. So Johnny, feel free to keep looking at the chat. Yeah, so macros are changing. This is the document that has been used this year and last year. So I know the macros are changing soon, but we don't have a new version yet, right, Fernanda?
I'm sorry, it was Rachel that asked the question,
but I don't know. I don't think we have a new. I just attended last week the WIDA conference for the 2020 revamped document, so I don't think we have. But anyways, less is more, macro functions, and we're going to show you how we focus on that one thing at a time. But this is the document itself, and it has more than one page, but this is the main page. So if you haven't seen that before, you know, that's the collaboration tool. So it is very useful for teachers to build units of study and curriculum maps. This is our opinion, and spending the whole year working together, how we use this document. I have used it in the past, last year, and I know I have some colleagues here that did that too and attended a presentation with me and some training. We use it to build units of study for the cell curriculum before, using the macro functions and focusing one macro function at a time per quarter. So thematic units, if you're familiar with MCUs, kind of the same idea. So it helps you get that starting point, what language you're going to focus at a time. And the functions are priorities and used to teach content in a curriculum unit level. That's what we did this year with the physics class, which I asked Johnny, what do you want? What are we teaching this quarter for the next 8 weeks, whatever the unit is? And we're going to focus in one macro at a time. And that's how this tool was so useful. It just narrowed things down and makes you, there's so much that needs to be taught in terms of language. So with the collaboration tool, you really have to be selected and you focus in one function at a time. So step one, if you're overwhelmed, if it's a lot, what do you do? So the first thing you have to do is pick a macro function, like I mentioned before. I know the macro functions are changing, but you're going to focus in one at a time. So for that quarter one, beginning of the school year, what function of language are we going to focus? And you talk to your content teacher, or if you're building your own curriculum for ESL or any other classes, you're going to focus in one. Recount, explain, argue, or discuss. Those are the ones before. That's all you do. You focus in one. If you click on them, I believe the PDF that we share with you, I'm not sure if you can click on them or not, because they were having trouble with the DESI main website. But it's just the explanation, it's just the definition of what microfunctions they are. I'm sure recount is not anymore for next school year. They're going to get rid of recount. Step 2, how do you use the second part? So once you have your macro function, you're going to pick one micro function. That's what we did, and it worked for us. One micro function that pairs with that macro function. So if you're going to pick the explain, maybe you can get a describe. So the language of explaining by describing something. And then at the end, you're going to have your content final objective. They can be mixed. You can use more than one. When we did the ESL curriculum last year, I think I used 2 per quarter paired with a macro function. Am I going too quick? So here's an example inside the micro function of elaborate. So just quickly coming back here, you picked a macro function and now you're going to pick the micro function of elaborate, for example. And then you have this world of language to teach for that quarter on top of teaching the content, right? So you're going to try to like mask the language inside the content to get those kids to speak more, read more, listen more, and what else? Write more. So when you go inside the micro function, you have to elaborate. For example, you have discourse, sentence, and word phrases. There's 3 different categories. Again, less is more. The first time we did that together, we just picked one of each. So for discourse, you pick 1 bullet, sentence 1 bullet, word 1 bullet, and phrase. And you focus on that for the quarter. Now you have, you narrow down your language for the whole entire quarter. They have some question stems examples, which is lovely on the right side. And if you look at the left, the top left corner, you can see that this is a level 2 for ELLs. And we are fortunate enough that most of our students were ELLs level 2s, so we could really focus on this. Now, what happens a lot in content area classes is the heterogeneous groups, right? You have a level 2, 3, 4, mainstream students, special ed, all together. So this is when it's a little tougher to make decisions, but this is just a cleaner class that we were able to narrow things down. So now, time for questions.
I see that 2 attendees have their hand raised. Do you have specific questions or? Okay. One of them took them down.
I don't see that.
Well, do you want me to call on them?
Oh, there's
If
one.
he has a specific question, sure.
We can even enable the microphone if somebody has a question right now.
Okay, I've allowed Mary to talk. Mary, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I wasn't sure how you wanted us to ask questions. I'll use the chat box.
Oh, Mary, I can't really hear you. Sorry. Are you connected to a mic?
Yeah. You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My question was, it is not until you reach like this third step where you're picking, you're going under discourse, sentence, and word phrase. That's the level at which you get down to the EPL level. Before that, it's just general. Is that right?
Yes. For you to get to this point here, I put the slide again. This should be done after you picked a macro function. And then you're gonna, with the macro that you have in mind, it needs to make sense to pair that with a micro. So if we pick the explain, we could easily pair it with elaborate, because on top of explaining something, if Mr. Johnny had a word problem for physics and students had to explain something, now you want to push that explain language to a whole level of elaborating the explanation. And in order for them to elaborate the explanation, they would have to use something from the discourse, sentence or word phrase that has to be taught or practiced in the classroom. And yes, so this wouldn't be used in isolation as a, I don't know, to be honest, we're still on the, we haven't used the collaboration tool for that long. It's only my second year using it. But it's to narrow things down. So this would be a step 3. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
So also, Lisa made a comment in the Q&A section saying that the collaboration tool doesn't seem to be working. And Lisa, that's most likely just a problem with the DESE main website. They were having issues with it before and it could have still carried over. And then Kelly also asked if we can share an example, and that's actually what we're going to go into a few specifics that we did in my physics classroom. So hopefully that'll satisfy your curiosity.
Yeah, we also have one question in the chat. So anyone who's asking questions in the chat, please use the Q&A so that it's more easily funneled that way. The question is from Christine. Can you give an example of your actual language objective for first quarter?
Yes, we're going to give you, that's what the whole tool is about today, the whole presentation. We have lots of examples coming. We just wanted to stop a little bit so you could breathe and digest all the information. So did it take a couple of terms to get this better handled? Patricia Garrison. Yes, it took a couple of years. And every term we learn from each other and we reflect, and we're going to talk about this too, and it gets better and better. And sometimes we nailed it. And students actually made progress on the language and content. And sometimes we're just going to have to do some reteaching. And we might have to do the macro function from quarter 1 again on quarter 2. We're talking about seniors and juniors in a high school setting that is very busy. But it's a work in progress, definitely. And there's always room for improvement. We haven't mastered much yet. We keep it humble. I see another question. I missed the beginning. How do you, Paula Merchant, how do you use the thinking space too between you? What do you mean? Thinking space? Planning time?
Do you mean like a planning time?
Johnny can answer that. Well, we are fortunate that admin is on our side, and we have great administrators that gave us planning time together on top of teaching those students. So we had 2 different periods that we saw each other and collaborated, one for planning. And yes, without it, I don't think that would have happened. Big difference when you have a that's the difference from co-teaching and push in, right? One thing is an ESL teacher pushing into a content area teacher and just helping doing, services for the students themselves. And another thing is co-teaching, which a lot of planning goes into this. Rachel, do you use the same macro function for a long period of time? Yeah, so we decided this year we're going to use each macro for entire quarter, because it's just the way Mr. Giosomini's classes go for it all depends on the content that you're teaching and what he wanted to teach. He had some units. So unit 1, for example, forces. He was going to teach that the whole entire quarter 1 for 8 weeks. Newton laws, you name it, a bunch of fun things. So we focus in one macro function paired with one micro function. And believe me, once you open this document here, this slide, it's a world of language that you can teach. Still focusing on the content area first.
Okay, should we move on? I think some of these questions are going to be answered with the coming slides. So,
all right, next. What's happening? Okay.
So those of you that are looking for some more kind of concrete examples, we wanted to, that's what's coming in the next few slides, but we wanted to start that out just with an example of what the Common Core standards look like for Massachusetts for physics. This is by no means the only thing that is supposed to be covered in quarter 1, but this is one of the many standards kind of relevant to some of the other examples we're going to be looking at today. And so if you are asking yourself right now, as some of you are, how do I use this tool? Especially if you are not an ESL teacher like me, you're a content area teacher, it definitely can be overwhelming. So the best thing to do is probably to always go back and revert to the standards, because you can use the language inside the standard to kind of help guide you. So there's, we don't have to go over this. This is not a physics lesson by any means, but there's a few things in here, and there's a few specific words that you will notice are also, for example, prediction, right? That's definitely one of the micro functions. So you can kind of use a standard to help guide the way you want to shape the class, because my class is a physics class. It's not a language class. I just have students that have certain needs that I'm trying to address. So can we actually go on to unless you want to add something to this, can we actually go over to the next slide?
Yeah, so just quickly, this is where the whole planning, that's the birth of it. That's the beginning. It's me looking at Mr. Giosomini and say, okay, what are we teaching this quarter? And then he gives me this Common Core Standards example. This is what we need to teach quarter 1. So from that, we're going to pick the macro and micro and start planning things. So this is what kids need to know. What happened? Okay.
So what you see right here is actually from what we call a pacing guide. So as we worked over the course of the year, we would just kind of plan ahead. It's important for Alini to know a little bit about the physics and what the students are going to be learning, even though her concentration is really on language and helping students with those specific needs. But we just put this at the top of our pacing guide, kind of as a constant reminder, something we could always go back to. And if we're ever struggling with a certain assignment or with a task for students, like what is it that we're focusing on? So as you can see here, if you look up at the top, quarter 1, the main thing that we covered was forces. And we chose the macro language function to focus on was explain. And we paired the micro language function describe to go with it. There's a lot of room for your own interpretation and in choosing which ones you want. It's not to say that we're only going to be focusing on explaining and describing the school year by any means. Prediction is a really big aspect of physics and science in general. So why did we choose describe instead of predict? part of the reason was it was the beginning of the school year, first quarter. Maybe you want to start a little more simplified with some of your students. And again, it's not like every assignment you give out, you're only going to have students describing something and explaining something. Students are going to be doing a whole different slew of techniques and strategies over the school year. But it's how do you want to focus yourself? How do you want to focus yourself when you're working on creating lessons for your students? Alina, you want to add anything? Because there's a lot more information on here.
Yeah, I think this is the busiest slides of all. This is the beginning of our pacing guide and page 1. And from this, we're going to start having our lesson plans. So this is the quarter scope and sequence, you know, if you want to call it that way. So once I know we're teaching forces, and I know I read the standards for physics, we have a macro language that is explained. And we are going to pair that with the scribe. We wrote a focus language goal. And, you know, with the DESI collaboration too, if you keep going the next few pages of the document itself, it does teach you how to write a focus language goal. Hopefully, Fernanda Craig, this one is correct.
So if I could chime in real quick. Meredith has a question. First, a request, if we can get a copy of this page. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this whole presentation is going to be shared with you or available on YouTube. So you would definitely be able to access it there. And then she asks how we determined the task associated with the functions. So if, I believe she's looking at that first main, like paragraph almost. So that's all straight from the tool.
Yeah, so those tasks associated with the functions are copy and paste from the tool for level 2s after you picked your micro. So in the micro, you have that on the top of the micro. Remember I showed you the 3 categories? You know, the sentence discourse, vocabulary, so those, you know, it's there. So it's just those power words that associated with the function, and then you're gonna hopefully you're gonna expose students to this by speaking, reading, listening, and writing, and on the graphic organizers that you are creating on your language objectives. And this is what you want them to do in order to describe, right? They could describe something by drawing because they're level 1 and they just came from another country 2 months ago. So those are all very powerful words that you just want to keep that on a word wall, or you want to just keep having them around because that supports the task of the function, of the language function. Do you want to use them all? No. Did we use them all, Johnny, this year? No. It's a lot, but we try to put them here and there.
You use the ones that will work for your class, for whatever you're teaching. You know, you don't need to limit yourself, and you don't need to feel like that you have to do everything to hit your marks.
Let's not forget that it's still a content area class. It's physics that they'll to learn, and it depends for the content, you know, what they need to master that day or that week, and you use those as a tool.
Right. It's honestly, it's just a great organizational tool. Andrea also had a question about whether or not the EL teacher's in the classroom every day. Alini was with me almost every day. I mean, there's a few times that you had other things that you had to do.
Well, once Access hits.
Right. I mean, you know, right. There was about a month straight where she was in the classroom, but we would still meet and plan regularly. And the next slide, you're going to see kind of a snippet of what one day's pacing guide will look like.
Don't
so
forget.
You could still use this tool whether or not you are co-teaching every day with a teacher, or if you just want to have an ESL teacher help you out once every few weeks, once a month or something. It's still very useful. This
is the big picture for the quarter. Don't forget, you're not going to do all this every day in every lesson. This is the big picture. Less is more. Keywords associated with the function, again, that comes from the micro function. And then you have your levels for discourse, sentence, and word phrase. Remember I told you less is more and you pick one bullet. So those are the bullets we picked. So because we are going to teach them how to explain and use the language of explain to describe, when they're describing something, we want them to use simple sentences. and grade appropriate text. So one thing we decided, we're not going to give them any adapted version of any reading, and they had to be exposed to grade appropriate text. Sentence level, we want them to use simple sentences, and the verb tense was going to be the past tense, especially irregular past tense. So that was the focus for that quarter. Word phrase, use simple vocabulary, and the vocabulary that Mr. G thinks they need to understand the content. Again, back to that standard from physics. We have some question stem samples at the bottom, and this is how we're going to push the language out of them and just try to extract that using those sentence starters, because those sentence starters are appropriate for the level 2 of ELLs. Moving on, questions? Yeah.
So this is what just one day from our pacing guide looks like as an example. And as you can see, it is pretty much just a stripped down version of, you know, any old lesson plan. Some of the language you see on here, like engage, explain, explore, those are really just from the science department we have at our school. We've just kind of all agreed to use the same language in all our lesson plans. So we kind of tailored the way we plan for our day-to-day class, so it just aligns with what the rest of the science department uses. But it's pretty much the same thing as like a do now, directed instruction, student guided practice, anything that some of you might be more familiar with, the language you would use in your own lesson plans. But it's essentially just an agenda in relevant vocabulary and objectives for the day, with special links to worksheets or to descriptions of lab activities, something like that. So the specific example we wanted to show you, and have a few videos to show if we have time for it, I think we do, was for one day in class where we were talking about Newton's laws, which some of you, I hope, maybe remember from when you were in high school. And it was like a lab activity. So how do we push students explaining and describing and learning physics through language and hands-on activities in the classroom? Now you can also see on here that we have 2 links. Those were just worksheets that I'd written and put together for the kids. And obviously I show Alini what I'm going to do, and she says, this is no good. We need to make it better for the ELL students. So we just put both of them in there, and that's fine. We don't have to go over the differences now. You're going to see a snippet of the ELL version in a minute anyway.
I never said no good. I said, I think it can be better.
It can always be better. So
before we move, I just want to, Meredith Borst has a question. If you have different levels within the same class, would you try to write these for each level? Ooh,
it's a lot. Now you're talking about really doing a lot of work, but you could. But it's just very time consuming.
Yeah. So from the pacing guide, I'll keep it the same. What I would change if I had had some level 2s and some level 4s is by the micro function. And I think I can go back. Sorry, what am I doing? Okay.
Forward. Okay.
So when you go here, the micro function that you picked, which is elaborate, this is a level 2 thing. So we picked one of each, one discourse, one sentence, one word phrase. If you had level 4s too, let's say half of the class is level 4s, so half of the class is level 2s, you could go ahead and get some from the level 4. But then you're going to have to pick and choose. And this is when, you know, this is what we do as educators. We just hustle.
Yeah.
So ideal world, to have level classes would work better.
So here's just a short, annoying sounding video of one of the activities that you'll see the groups of kids were doing. Newton's laws, for those of you who don't remember, there are 3 of them. And that day's activity was we kind of had the kids would rotate through stations, 3 different stations. Each station, they would do a short activity that had to do with one of the 3 laws. And then there was a few questions for them to answer. Maybe they would have to describe what they saw, or they would have to explain what the law is based on some interaction. You can play that quickly if you want.
I will.
So what you saw there was just, again, a really simple activity. You know, the kids can spend maybe 5-10 minutes in each one, going over the instructions, setting it up, and the little balloon going down the string, it's pretty much a little air-powered rocket ship, right? So there would be an example of Newton's third law, equal and opposite forces. And then the students had specific questions to answer, and it was really on the worksheet that they had that we used a lot of these practices, how to kind of break down the language for them, how to break down the different stations, and to get them to describe what they saw and explain how that applies to the laws, both talking to each other and in writing.
Continue.
Yep, that's unless someone has questions or really wants to see it again for some reason.
I think we don't.
Yeah.
The last one was two. I think I answered the last question from Meredith. Oh, 10. Hold on. I think there's a question.
Yes, Andrea, yes, we did provide graphic organizers to help describing the activity.
It's coming. You guys are on top of things. I love it. Want me to just play this, Mr. G?
If you want to. We're running kind of short on time.
We are. Okay, but that one's important.
Sure, then you can play for them. But.
So this is another example in action. Collaboration tool, speaking, getting some language out of our beautiful children.
So there's a little bit of background. The two students that you see right there, one of them is relatively low level, and the other one is pretty much a native English speaker.
Yeah, she's bilingual, but she was born in American native speaker.
So it's also nice to try to. The balloon went forward because what? The air went backwards, right? So balloon forward because the air went backwards, right? That's the equal and opposite action. You just followed it.
What is that?
So the balloon went this way.
So the pressure has to be on the object.
That's right. The balloon went forward this way because the air went the opposite.
Got it.
So write it down.
So science labs get a little chaotic sometimes.
It couldn't be more real what we deal with the physics class in the high school and lab days. They're a lot of fun, but
Yeah.
I was busy.
But sometimes it is, it's important for the kids to get not only that hands-on thing, but how do you get them to talk about what they're doing and write down what they're doing? I mean, there's just so many different ways that you can apply these language practices.
Just to highlight very quickly, the language component there was to use the simple past tense while explaining and describing. And Mr. G kept saying it went that way because we're talking about irregular verbs and how beautiful that we're actually conjugating verbs in a physics class. That was just what made my heart dance that day. Again, just quickly breaking down microfunctions, less is more. We picked one each. I highlighted that before. What time is it? I don't have a...
It is 1:40.
Okay, we have 5 minutes. Any more questions? No? I think that's it.
Okay, we'll answer them as they come in.
I think there's one. They take a minute, right, Jason? It feels like.
Yeah, they take some time to type.
Okay.
There's one question now. I don't know if we can-
Was there department and admin support for this work?
I mentioned that a few times. Yes, yes, and yes. Without administration, this would not be happening. Co-teaching is about planning together and having time during the day. We had a full 90-minute period. No, sorry. We had a 45-minute period every other day.
For planning.
Planning, which sounds like a lot. It's not. And we
That goes
taught,
by quickly.
yes, and we taught together 90 minutes every other day. So yes, this is the only chance we have to write something like this and get this document together. Thanks for planning time. So maybe we just do this one by watching the video, practice time. And if you want, you can answer on the chat. Jason, can you enable the chat?
It's enabled.
Okay, so how do you use the macro function? How do you see the macro function being used? And what language domains do you see that they were being used? Reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So this is when you see things in action. We're really teaching this content. Do you see a macro function? We don't, you know, if you don't have to answer, it's just, you know, food for thought and guided questions.
No.
Because your paper's already over there.
Equal and opposite reaction? Yeah. Yeah. So what happened when the balloon was released? You move forward, the straw.
So if you're done, you guys go back to your seats. Ladies, thank you very much. On that note.
So to answer quickly, you saw them listening, you saw them speaking, saw them writing. So the focus was really the speaking and the writing. It was those output, you know, the expressive part of it. We wanted them producing. And the macro function being used was the explaining, right? So to explain.
We have a few other questions in the Q&A. Question from Emily, which I liked a lot. If you were trying to get students to use simple past verbs in physics class, did you deliberately teach simple past verbs in science texts?
No.
No, we didn't. Also, these, but I think we have a
graphic organizer. Yeah, so I created a graphic organizer highlighting the simple past tense when students had to answer questions about the content. This is when the ESL teacher, it's like a chicken with no head in the classroom, jumping around from desk to desk and actually doing the mini lessons if necessary for that kind of thing. We thought about it, right, Johnny? But it's really hard to have like time to do mini lessons.
Right.
I totally encourage, and I think if we work together next year or in the future.
And I think you need to really, you got to make that decision based on the level of your students in class if you think that's going to benefit them, because you really only have so much time in a day. But there's a picture, I believe, of what they're writing on now, and you'll see that there's certain words or parts of words are bolded or emphasized, and to try to bring that out to students.
Just a quick question. Somebody had a question about assessment, if we assess them together. At the end is about the content that students are being assessed and getting graded. So Mr. G is the one. I have access to the grade book too, and I try to assess them with some graphic organizers that I created with Johnny. But the ultimate goal is to get them to really learn the content. And here and there, they get assessed in the language thing. So that's something in progress. We still have to talk about it. We should be assessing more of the language part of it too, but it's more like an observation technique, I would say, than assessment in terms of grading. That answers the question.
And Christina asked if we used it 2 years ago. Was this the first year using it? Did you find that you revised your work much after putting it into practice? So this year was the first time I had seen it or ever heard of it. And I can say that I feel like my practice kind of just evolved as the year went along, because I had never had to use it before, or really, you know, you have to think about these things to some extent when you're teaching certain populations. But it really changed the way I thought about like lesson planning, for sure. And this was just my first time seeing it. So
let's not forget that Mr. G is SCI certified. He took the MTEL and passed it, not just endorsed. So I think that helped too, because then once I had these ideas on the table, you know, he rang the bell here and there, what we're talking about. I think it's, are we, Jason?
It's 1:45.
Okay, so I just want to wrap it up and show, this is a
no,
graphic.
we can go through some of these pretty quickly, but.
Do we have 2 minutes, or do we need to say goodbye, or?
Oh, no, you can keep going. Yeah, you have until 2 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, okay. Okay, awesome. I didn't know that. I thought it was a 45-minute presentation. So this is a graphic organizer. It's another practice. It just, you know, I wish we were like in person and we could see each other. To identify and the micro functions. So you have the micro functions on the right side. Which one do you think it's being used for this graphic organizer? So again, it's forces. No, this was before forces, right, Johnny?
No, this was actually, we were going back and doing a review of everything we did in Q1, which, as you can see, it's not just forces, right? There's a lot more to it than just that.
This is the quiz review. So this is when I try to take some action and create graphic organizers and help students to review for the big quiz that was coming. So yeah, they had to, there's a few micro functions you could use here. One would be classify. Another one would be identify. What else, Johnny?
Even summarize. A lot of what we were doing was just going back and summarizing ideas that we had talked about before. Elaborate. There's room for examples on there. So, you know, that's the thing with these micro functions, is that on any given assignment, you can probably say that more than one of them you can apply to any given assignment or something like that. It's again, what I liked about it was a way to kind of focus what you already know and what you're already doing. And so you can make minor tweaks that way to really make it better.
So this is part of something bigger as for vocabulary, which is a word wall. So we had a huge word wall. We tried to work with those word walls. And, you know, that was part of it. So the words were there and they had to find the words from a giant word wall and what category that would go. Because nothing is too simple in physics. Okay, this is an oral practice with flashcards about heat transfer. I have to give credit to my dear friend Nicoletta Filimon and Christy Cartwright. You probably know them from MATSOL. They present a lot. We worked together before. And they created this this oral practice, you know, how to do oral practices with flashcards, and we adapted to physics, which I think was the first time ever. And you know, the macro function being used. So what is the definition of? Give me a word, Johnny.
Inertia.
Inertia. The definition of inertia is blah 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 blah. Can you give me an example in a sentence? Now students have to use it in a sentence. And this is when you push the micro function, which was the simple past tense. You could use it right here. You could, you know, transform the questions into simple past too. And can you explain how inertia applies to the concept of heat and transfer? Now we get them really talking and, you know, little slide and glide, kids talking to each other and one in front of the other. You can get really creative with this. They have their own flashcards that they built before. First time you do flashcards with high school students, like pulling teeth, and there's some, they get defensive, they hate it, but then they like it after once they keep using the flashcards.
I think we should just kind of move forward.
Yeah, I think we're good. We don't need this one. This is just another, you know.
So, can I actually just ask very quickly, I know we don't have too much time, but can I ask very quickly, who in here is, I guess, not an ESL teacher? I don't know if you guys want to raise your hands or something. Am I the only content teacher here? I hope not, but one other person. Good. So,
wow.
So, okay. Well, from the content teacher perspective, there's a lot of good with this, and there's definitely some challenges. The pros being that student language needs are met. I mean, if you have an ESL teacher in the classroom working with you directly, it's just going to be better for the students. They're better able to absorb content when language is direct, unambiguous. There's things you already know, I'm sure. And it was also very good for me because it really helped me focus my lesson planning. Some of the difficulties, though, is that most of the classrooms are not so homogeneous. You know, the students are not generally all on the same level. Most of my classes, I have 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s, just like all sitting together. And the risk is that some of those native English speakers or 6s can potentially get a little turned off if you shift the class. My class that's supposed to be physics, if I started shifting and I would spend a whole class or a half a class talking about, verb tenses and stuff, then that's just, you have to expect some kids to be checked out at that point. And it definitely does take a lot of time and practice to really use this effectively, create accessible, rigorous assignments that don't only focus on language over content instruction. Actually, Christina had made a comment in here, I see. She used to use the tool to work with math teachers, and it is definitely hard to tackle on your own. I would not have been able to use this if it wasn't Eleni pretty much guiding me by the hand all semester saying, this is what we're going to do next. So it's a lot. There's a lot of information here, but it definitely helps.
It's just less is more, and you focus in specific things. It's almost like you're on a diet and there's just certain things you can eat.
Also, I did wanted to address some of the other questions I saw quickly. Do we use more than one class period to complete the lab? Usually not, because our classes are 90 minutes. So most of the time we can get them done. There were a couple activities like longer term projects. We had our students build a roller coaster that took like a couple days, but fortunately, this past year, we had pretty long class periods. So we didn't really have to worry about moving stuff around or sharing resources between classes while kids are still busy doing the project. This is the only class that we co-teach, and this is our first year co-teaching together.
Is DESI going to fix the hot links? This has been a process, and I want to say yes. It's been a few months that I have tried. I could find the link, I could find the PDF format of the tool itself, but when you click on the micro functions to get the word of language, you're not able to do that. So we contacted central office, contacted DESI directly, and we got a reply saying that they were going to be fixed. Now that I see that the WIDA 2020 standards are changing too, I wonder if there's something to do with that. They're waiting for this WIDA and, to redo the macro functions, and I don't know, but it's just the way the world is right now. I don't know the answer, but I want to believe, yes, they will be fixed. If you really want to see all the micro functions I have on a Word document, I'll be happy to share with you what I have. You can send me an email. We have, our contact is at the end of this presentation, gladly.
There's another question about, you mentioned that their students also have separate ELL classes in addition to some classes they might have with an ESL co-teacher. And do we try to align language goals with the ELL classes to support language goals in content areas? The answer is definitely yes. Sometimes it's difficult because of the students that we had in the class that Eleni and I co-taught. Not all of them were also Eleni students in her ESL class. So it requires a little bit of coordination among the different ESL teachers. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that we try to do.
Yeah, so language goals were done too for the ESL classes because we use the collaboration tool to build our units of study in our curriculum. Definitely. And those students, most of them are ELLs level 2. So because of a compliance, they have to have certain hours of language classes. They were taking ESL classes, and the physics as the co-teaching is part of the language model, and for compliance and the hours they need. Okay, we have 6 minutes. This is going great. So excited. So this is homework that I gave Johnny at the end of each quarter. And it's just a reflective practice document that, how did we do as co-teachers? First of all, every quarter we sat down and we talk about, in terms of students, what worked, what can be better, what have we learned? Co-teaching context, what worked, what can be better, and what we learned. And I added a third column this year just for curriculum and instruction for the DESI collaboration tool, like what really worked there that we can do it again, what do we need to do it again? Did we get the language of explain out of those students? Are they really explaining and elaborating their explanations in order to understand the content, what Johnny really wanted them to learn for that quarter 1 in forces? So this is just, I think this is great. This is from a training I did before and about co-teaching. The references are at the end. If you want to know what book that comes from. Any more questions? Or should I just keep going?
That's the end. So if you have more questions, now's the time to ask them. Catherine asked, building on a previous question, are you also co-teaching a history class? In this case, would you use the same macro and micro and language, which is carried over to your EL class?
Well, I didn't pair the macros and micros from my ESL class per se. I teach ESL intervention, which is ESL 4. Students almost there with the access scores, 3.9s, 4.1s kind of thing. Not necessarily, because our school is so big that we couldn't have every single kid clustered correctly that they would take class with me and also take Johnny's class. In this case, you know, this did not happen. That would be a dream. That would be amazing. I don't know if it will work or not, if they just need to do the other macros. The goal is to do the 4 macro functions.
Yeah, I think smaller schools, maybe where your students are like in specific cohorts, then that's something that's a lot more easy to do between different content areas. But you can also use this tool and be the only one in your department using it. Like it's a lot to take in, but if you learn how to digest it slowly, it's still very helpful.
Yes, but the goal is to use all 4 macro functions. And if you can use all those micro functions in 1 year, lovely. It's just a lot. So if you have any questions, if you'd like, I'm sure the copy of the presentation will be on MATSOL website. This is recorded. If you need anything else, please, if you ever want to come see us in action, hopefully next school year, we're back in school. That'll be great. References up there too. Hopefully I gave enough credit to everybody who really, really helped. Fernanda Cray was a big celebrity here, so thank you for coming, Fernanda. Hopefully I did things right.
Okay, and on behalf of MATSOL, thank you very much, Alini and Johnny. Yeah, it was a great presentation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And yes, again, this is recorded, and the recording is